What if the most magnetic thing you could ever do, the thing that makes people lean in, pay attention, and suddenly realize what they had, was absolutely nothing at all? There is a paradox sitting at the center of human desire that almost nobody talks about openly, and yet every single person reading this has felt it in their bones at least once in their life. The moment you stop wanting something desperately, it starts coming toward you. The moment you release the grip, the thing you were gripping starts reaching back. The moment you stop chasing, the entire dynamic shifts. The energy in the room changes. The balance of power tilts. And the person or opportunity or outcome that was retreating from your pursuit suddenly finds itself curious about your stillness. This is not manipulation. This is not a game. This is one of the oldest, most consistent, most profound truths about human psychology and the nature of desire itself. And today, we are going to understand it completely. Not on the surface. Not as a tactic to deploy in some temporary situation. But at the deepest level of philosophy, psychology, and lived human experience, so that when you walk away from this conversation, you carry something that genuinely and permanently changes how you move through the world. Let's start with something that will reframe everything. Most people believe that chasing is a sign of strength. That relentless pursuit is the evidence of commitment, of desire, of the kind of hunger that produces results. We are told from an early age that the people who get things are the people who go after them. That persistence is a virtue. That the harder you push, the closer you get. And in certain contexts, absolutely. In the pursuit of a skill, in the building of a craft, in the long disciplined work of creating something meaningful, persistence is everything. The Stoics honored this. Marcus Aurelius wrote an entire philosophy of daily effort and quiet dedication to duty. But there is a category of pursuit, a very specific, very recognizable kind, where the opposite is true. Where every step forward you take causes the thing you want to take a step back. Where your intensity drives away the very outcome you are desperate to reach. Where the energy of need, raw, exposed, undisguised need, becomes the primary reason you cannot have what you want. That category is every dynamic that involves another human being's free will. You cannot chase a person into genuine desire. You cannot pursue your way into someone's authentic respect. You cannot close the distance between yourself and your worth by running toward the people who are supposed to recognize it. Because here is what chasing communicates, regardless of your intention, regardless of how eloquently you explain yourself, regardless of how pure your motives are. I need your response to feel okay about myself. And the moment that message lands, consciously or unconsciously, everything shifts. Not in your favor. There was a man named Marcus, not the emperor, though the irony of the name will become relevant, who had built a successful career, a genuinely good life, and a personality that most people found warm and engaging. But Marcus had one wound that ran deeper than everything else he had built. He needed to be chosen. Not just loved, chosen. Actively, explicitly, repeatedly selected above all other options by the people he cared about. And when he felt that selection was uncertain, when a friend became distant or a romantic interest became ambiguous or a colleague seemed to cool, something primal activated inside him. He would chase. Texts sent at increasing frequency. Plans proposed and reproposed. Conversations steered toward reassurance. An almost invisible but completely constant effort to close the gap between himself and the other person's validation. And every time, without exception, with a consistency that should have told him something important, the chasing made it worse. The friend grew more distant. The romantic interest became more ambiguous. The colleague cooled further. Because what Marcus was communicating, through every text, every reproposed plan, every reassurance-seeking conversation, was not love. Was not warmth. Was not the genuine, grounded, secure connection that actually draws people in. It was hunger. Exposed and undisguised. And hunger, when it is aimed at a person rather than a purpose, frightens people. It places a weight on them that they didn't agree to carry. It makes them feel responsible for something that is not theirs to manage. And so they do what humans do when they feel the pressure of someone else's unmet need pressing against them. They create distance. Not to be cruel. Not to punish. But because distance is the only way to breathe when someone else's need for you has consumed all the oxygen in the room. Now I want to go deeper than the story. I want to go into the actual psychological mechanism, because understanding why this happens is what transforms this from an interesting observation into a permanent shift in how you operate. There is a concept in psychology called reactance. It describes a very specific, very consistent human response to the perception of lost freedom. When a person feels that their freedom to choose, their autonomy, their ability to move in any direction they want without external pressure, is being threatened or restricted, they respond by moving in the opposite direction. Not because they have considered the situation carefully. Not because they have made a deliberate decision. But because something deep and automatic in the human psyche rebels against pressure. Against the feeling of being pursued into a corner. Against the sense that someone else's need is making demands on their will. The chasing, however well-intentioned, registers as pressure. The pressure activates reactance. The reactance produces retreat. And the retreat intensifies the chasing. It is a cycle. And it feeds itself. And the only way to break it is to do the thing that feels the most counterintuitive in the moment. Stop. Not as a tactic. Not with one eye on whether the stopping produces the result you want. But as a genuine, grounded, philosophically rooted decision to reclaim your own center, and let other people's responses belong entirely to them. Epictetus, a man who had every reason in the world to understand the corrosive effect of desperate need, having spent years as a slave with no control over his external circumstances, built his entire philosophy around a truth that applies with devastating precision here. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. What he is describing is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is not the defeated acceptance of someone who has given up. It is the radical, courageous, profoundly difficult practice of releasing your grip on outcomes that were never yours to control in the first place. The other person's feelings, not yours to control. The way the situation unfolds, not yours to control. Whether you are chosen, validated, pursued in return, not yours to control. What is yours, entirely, completely, sovereignly yours, is how you carry yourself through the uncertainty. Whether you maintain your dignity in the not knowing. Whether you keep building your life while the outcome remains unresolved. And here is what nobody tells you about that practice. It is not just philosophically correct. It is magnetically attractive. Let me explain why. And I want you to pay close attention here because this is the part that most conversations about this topic completely miss. Human beings are drawn, at a level that operates beneath conscious thought, to people who do not need them. Not people who don't care. People who genuinely don't need. People whose sense of self, whose daily functioning, whose experience of their own worth, does not depend on what any particular person does or doesn't do in return. These people have something that the chasing person, by definition, does not have in the moment of chasing. They have completeness. And completeness is the most attractive quality a human being can possess. More attractive than appearance. More attractive than status. More than wit or charm or any of the qualities we typically think of as the building blocks of desirability. Because completeness communicates something at a frequency that every human nervous system responds to before the rational mind has even weighed in. This person is okay. This person is not going to need me to hold them together. This person brings something to this dynamic rather than drawing from it. And that communication, made not through words but through the simple, grounded, unhurried energy of someone who has stopped chasing, opens a door that all the chasing in the world could never open. There is a woman named Adise whose story I find myself returning to often. Adise had been in a friendship for 7 years that had, over time, become profoundly unequal. She gave. Her friend received. She initiated. Her friend responded when convenient. She pursued. Her friend remained pleasantly, passively available, just engaged enough to keep Adiz invested, never fully enough to make her feel secure. One day, not after a confrontation, not after a dramatic breaking point, but after a very quiet, very clear moment of exhaustion, Adiz simply stopped. She stopped initiating. She stopped following up. She stopped crafting messages designed to produce the warmth she was hungry for. She redirected the energy she had been pouring into the friendship into her own life, her work, her other relationships, the creative project she had been neglecting for months. She did not do this as a strategy. She did it because she had nothing left. 3 weeks later, her friend called. Genuinely concerned. Wanting to know if everything was okay. Initiating, for what felt like the first time in years, with real, unperformed interest in Adiz's life. Now, I want to be careful here. Because the point of this story is not that stopping always brings people back. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the absence reveals that there was never as much there as you thought. And that revelation, painful as it is its own kind of gift. The point is what happened inside Adiz during those 3 weeks. She remembered who she was without the dynamic. She rediscovered the version of herself that existed before she had organized so much of her energy around trying to secure someone else's consistent affection. She felt, perhaps for the first time in years, like a complete person rather than a person with a hole in them shaped exactly like her friend's approval. And that completeness, that quiet, self-contained, genuinely inhabited wholeness, was what her friend responded to. Not the stopping. The becoming that the stopping made room for. This brings us to what I believe is the most important idea in this entire conversation. Ignoring is not a passive act. Most people think of ignoring as an absence, the absence of pursuit, the absence of reaching, the absence of the chasing behavior that has been consuming them. And on the surface, yes. It looks like nothing. It looks like stillness. It looks, to the outside observer, like a person who has simply gone quiet. But inside, in the interior landscape of a person who is genuinely practicing this, something very active is happening. They are building. They are taking the energy that was bleeding out through the wound of unreciprocated pursuit, and redirecting it back into themselves. Into their craft, their health, their vision for their own life, the relationships that are genuinely nourishing, the version of themselves that existed before the chasing began and that has been waiting, patiently, for the chasing to stop. Ignoring, real, grounded, philosophically rooted ignoring, is one of the most intensely constructive acts a person can perform. It is the act of choosing yourself over the temporary relief of someone else's response. It is the act of deciding that your energy, your irreplaceable, finite, deeply valuable energy, deserves better than to be poured into a vessel that will not hold it. It is the act of coming home. Seneca wrote something that lands differently when you read it through the lens of this conversation. He said, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who hankers after more." The chasing person is not poor in the conventional sense. They may have everything the world considers valuable. But in the specific economy of self-possession, in the currency of inner completeness and sovereign stillness, they are operating from scarcity. And scarcity, in human dynamics, repels. Not because people are cruel. But because abundance attracts abundance. Completeness draws completeness. The person who is full, who is genuinely, unhurriedly, unperformatively full of their own life, their own purpose, their own unfolding, naturally magnetizes people and opportunities that match that frequency. While the person who is chasing broadcasts their emptiness with every step forward they take. The moment you stop chasing, you stop broadcasting scarcity. And everything, gradually, then suddenly, then completely, begins to change. We have covered profound ground in this first part of the conversation. We have looked at why chasing fails, not as a moral judgment but as a psychological and philosophical reality. We have gone into the mechanism of reactance and understood why pressure produces retreat almost universally. We have grounded this in Stoic philosophy and the radical, liberating truth that outcomes involving other people's free will were never ours to control. And we have begun to understand that ignoring is not an absence, it is a construction. A return. A reclamation. But we are only halfway through. There is something that happens in the first few days after you stop chasing that nobody prepares you for. It is not relief. Not immediately. It is not the clean, cinematic liberation of a person who has finally put down a heavy weight and is walking freely into the light. That version exists, but it comes later. What comes first is something far more uncomfortable, far more honest, and far more important. What comes first is the silence. The silence where the chasing used to be. And for most people, that silence is the hardest part of this entire journey. Because the chasing, as exhausting and as dignity-eroding as it was, served a function. It kept you occupied. It gave your anxiety somewhere to go. It created the illusion of agency, the feeling that you were doing something about the situation, that you were actively working toward the outcome you needed. When you stop, the silence arrives. And in that silence, you come face to face with the thing the chasing was designed to help you avoid. Yourself. Your actual feelings about what is happening. Your honest assessment of what the dynamic has cost you. The grief underneath the pursuit, grief for what you hoped this would be, grief for the version of yourself that got quieter and smaller and more desperate as the chasing went on. The silence is not empty. It is full of everything you have been too busy chasing to feel. And sitting in it, fully, honestly, without immediately filling it with some new distraction, is the first and most important act of the practice we are building today. Most people, when they attempt to stop chasing, make a critical mistake. They stop the behavior without addressing the belief underneath it. They stop texting, but they are still checking their phone every 4 minutes waiting for a text back. They stop initiating plans, but they are mentally rehearsing the conversation they will have when the other person finally reaches out. They stop the external pursuit, but internally, they are chasing harder than ever. The need hasn't been addressed. It has just been moved from behavior into thought. And because it is now invisible, it is in some ways more consuming than before. This is why so many people find that stopping doesn't actually bring the peace they were looking for. They have changed the surface without touching the foundation. And the foundation, the belief that their okayness depends on this person's response, is still running everything from underneath. So before we talk about what to do, we need to talk about what to believe. And the belief that changes everything is this. You are already complete. Not in a motivational poster sense. Not as a comforting thing to say to yourself while you are secretly hoping the other person comes back. But as a genuine, philosophically grounded, empirically verifiable truth about the nature of your worth. Your worth is not produced by being chosen. It is not confirmed by being pursued. It is not made real by someone else's validation or destroyed by their indifference. It exists, fully, entirely, without conditions, independent of every dynamic you have ever been in or will ever enter. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth constantly in his most private writing. In the middle of governing an empire, fighting wars, managing betrayal and loss and the full catastrophic weight of human circumstance, he kept writing to himself the same essential reminder. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he is pointing to is not the strength of force or control or getting what you want from the world. It is the strength of a person who has located their foundation inside themselves, so completely and so honestly that no external circumstance can reach it. That is the belief underneath the practice. Not that the chasing is strategically ineffective, though it is. But that you were never lacking the thing you were chasing for. That what you were searching for in their response was always, already, inside you. When that belief becomes real, not just known but genuinely, embodied, lived as real, the chasing doesn't require discipline to stop. It simply becomes unnecessary. Now let's talk about what you actually do with the space that opens up. Because this is where most conversations on this topic go vague, and I refuse to leave you there. The space that the chasing occupied was not small. Think about how much of your mental and emotional real estate was consumed. The mental rehearsals of conversations. The analysis of every message for hidden meaning. The emotional preparation for every interaction. The recovery time after every interaction that didn't go the way you needed. The background hum of anxiety that ran underneath everything else you were doing. That is an enormous amount of energy. And now, if you are genuinely stopping, it is available. The question is what you build with it. And I want to be specific here, because the answer matters more than most people realize. Because what you choose to build in the space left by the chasing will determine whether the stopping produces genuine transformation, or just a temporary pause before the next version of the same pattern begins. The first thing you build is presence. Not productivity. Not achievement. Not the performative busyness of someone who is filling their schedule to prove to themselves that they are fine. Presence. The simple, radical, extraordinarily difficult practice of being fully where you are. There is a reason this is the first thing, because chasing is fundamentally an act of being somewhere else. Your body is in one place. Your attention is entirely somewhere else, with someone else, orbiting their choices and their responses and their unpredictable interior weather. When you stop chasing, you come back to your own life. And your own life, the actual, physical, sensory, moment-by-moment experience of being where you are, has been running without your full attention for however long the chasing has been happening. Come back to it. Notice what is actually in front of you. The quality of light in the room you are sitting in. The conversation you are having with someone who is genuinely present with you. The work on your desk that has been waiting for the focus you have been giving to someone who wasn't even in the room. Presence is not passive. It is the most active, most demanding, most rewarding practice available to a human being. And it is only possible when you are not simultaneously somewhere else. Come back. The second thing you build is standard. And this one is where the real power lives. Every time you chase someone who is not meeting you, every time you pursue validation from someone who is withholding it, every time you reach for connection from someone who is pulling back, you are communicating something to your own nervous system about what you are worth. You are communicating that their half-presence is enough. That their ambiguity is acceptable. That their inconsistency is something you are willing to organize your emotional life around. And your nervous system, which is learning constantly from every experience you give it, takes note. A man named Raymond spent 4 years chasing a professional opportunity that kept almost materializing and then retreating. A partnership that was always a conversation away from being real. A collaboration that was perpetually promising and perpetually incomplete. Raymond organized enormous amounts of energy around this almost opportunity. He stayed available. He followed up with careful precision. He turned down other things that might have conflicted with it. One day, in a coffee shop, waiting for a meeting that was postponed for the 11th time, he had a thought that changed everything. What am I teaching myself about what I deserve? Not what was he teaching the other party. What was he teaching himself? Because every time he rearranged his life to accommodate the almost opportunity, he was practicing, drilling, really, at the level of deep habit, the belief that almost was good enough for him. That day, Raymond stopped waiting. He took the other meetings. He built the other relationships. He let the almost opportunity either become real on its own or reveal itself as the illusion it had always been. It revealed itself as the illusion. And the space it left was immediately filled, not by desperation, but by the grounded, standard-holding energy of someone who had decided that almost was no longer a category he was willing to live in. Build your standard. Not as an act of arrogance. As an act of self-respect. Decide, clearly, specifically, without apology, what you are actually available for. What quality of presence? What level of reciprocity? What kind of energy you are willing to let into the rooms of your life? And then hold it. Not rigidly. Not without compassion for human complexity and the genuine imperfection of every real relationship. But hold it. Because the standard you hold is the life you build. The third thing you build, and this is the one that produces what everyone is really after when they talk about the power of ignoring, is self-magnetism. Self-magnetism is not charisma. It is not the performance of confidence. It is not the carefully constructed presentation of someone who wants to appear unbothered while internally monitoring whether the appearance is working. It is what happens when a person becomes genuinely, deeply, unperformatively interested in their own unfolding. Think about the people in your life who have this quality. The ones who seem to carry a kind of gravity, who don't need to demand attention because attention naturally flows toward them. Who don't need to pursue because people naturally move in their direction. What they have is not a technique. It is a relationship with themselves. They find their own life interesting. They are invested in their own growth. They have projects, questions, pursuits, things they are building and learning and discovering, that fill their attention with something more sustaining than the outcome of any single external dynamic. And that self-investment, that genuine, unhurried, unperformative absorption in the work of becoming, is the most magnetic quality a human being can possess. Because it is rare. In a world where most people are half present, one eye on the screen, one ear on the conversation, half their attention on what someone else might be doing or thinking or choosing, a person who is fully inhabiting their own life stands out with a kind of quiet force that no amount of chasing could ever produce. This is why the Stoics invested so deeply in self-cultivation. Not for the external result it might produce. Not as a strategy to attract better circumstances. But because a life fully inhabited is its own reward, and everything it attracts is simply the natural consequence of someone choosing, every day, to be genuinely, completely present to who they are and what they are building. Become interested in yourself. Not narcissistically. Genuinely. The way you would be interested in a person you found fascinating, with curiosity, with investment, with the patience to keep showing up even when the progress is slow. You are the most important project you will ever work on. Treat yourself accordingly. There is a short story that sits with me whenever I think about this final point. A sculptor named Elias spent 30 years working on a single figure. Not because he was slow. Not because he lacked skill. But because he was completely, utterly absorbed in the work itself, in the daily practice of removing everything from the stone that was not the figure he could feel living inside it. People came to watch. Some stayed interested. Some lost patience and left. Some came back years later, drawn by something they couldn't quite name, a quality in Elias himself, in the way he moved around the stone, in the absolute absence of performance in everything he did. He was not working to impress them. He was not monitoring their reactions to calibrate his effort. He was simply doing the work. Fully. Every day. With the complete commitment of someone who had found what they were for. When the figure was finally complete, 30 years, one sculpture, one man completely given to one purpose, it was not just beautiful. It was alive in the way that only things made by people who were fully alive themselves can be. People stood in front of it and felt something they could not explain. What they were feeling was the residue of total, unself-conscious, unchasing, completely inhabited human presence. Pressed into stone over 30 years. And still warm. I want to bring this entire conversation home now. Because we have covered enormous ground, and I want to make sure you leave here with something that is not just understood but genuinely felt. The power of ignoring is not the power of withholding. It is not the power of playing games or manufacturing distance to make yourself seem more valuable. It is not a manipulation dressed in philosophical clothing. It is the power of return. Return to yourself. Return to your own life. Return to the projects and the people and the quiet daily practices that make you who you actually are, beneath every dynamic, beneath every pursuit, beneath every version of yourself that emerged in response to someone else's choices. When you stop chasing, you stop leaking. The energy that was bleeding out through every unanswered text, every reproposed plan, every conversation angled toward reassurance, that energy comes back. And it comes back with compound interest. Because energy that is redirected inward doesn't just restore you to where you were before the chasing began. It builds something new. Something stronger. Something more grounded. Something that carries, in its very posture and its very presence, the unmistakable quality of a person who has chosen themselves, fully, finally, and without apology. And that quality, that quiet, unperformative, deeply attractive quality of a person who is completely at home in themselves, is what changes everything. Not the stopping. The becoming that the stopping makes possible. You were not made to chase. You were made to build. To grow. To inhabit your own life with the full force of everything you are, and to let what is genuinely meant for you find its way to you, drawn by the gravity of someone who stopped running and started being. Stop chasing. Come home. Build something extraordinary in the space that opens up. And watch, with the patient, grounded, unhurried confidence of someone who finally understands how this works. Watch everything change. If this conversation reached something real in you, if something in part 1 or here in part 2 gave language to something you have been living but couldn't fully articulate, then I want to tell you something important. This is what the Stoic path does. Every single week. We do not come here for surface-level inspiration. We do not trade in empty motivation or recycled advice dressed up in new packaging. We come here for the real conversations. The deep ones. The ones that go past the symptoms and into the root. The ones that leave you not just feeling something but understanding something, in a way that actually changes how you think and how you live. If that is the kind of content your life has room for, and I believe it is, because you are still here, then subscribe to the Stoic Path right now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. Because there is so much more of this coming. More philosophy, more stories, more of the honest, grounded, genuinely transformative conversation that this community was built for. Share this with someone who is still chasing. Someone who is still organizing their piece around someone else's response. Someone who is one conversation away from remembering who they were before the pursuit began. Send it to them. Because sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone you love is hand them the exact truth they didn't know they were ready for. This is the Stoic path. Stop chasing. Start becoming.